So I, as a lobbyist on the conservative side of the aisle 15 years ago around this town here, was saying any infringement on the food companies was an attack on the free market. That was BS. They have rigged the market. They paid millions of dollars to Harvard to produce studies in the 70s and 80s and 90s saying sugar doesn't cause obesity. They then used those studies with Harvard to go to the USDA and buy them off to do a processed food marketing document, the food pyramid. And, all of our parents in the 90s thought it was just totally fine to feed their kids ultra-processed food, right? And that was actually following government guidelines. This was a very deliberate strategy. At the same time, the medical organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, were not calling this out. They were taking money from food companies. I mean, it is still just astounding to me that 90% of the American Diabetes Association funding comes from food companies and pharma companies. They create the standard of care for obesity. Until 2018, their official guidance was that a diabetic doesn't have to change their diet. Their official guidance was that a diabetic can eat as much sugar as they want. They can drink Coca-Cola. They've actually been funded by Coca-Cola. And they said as long as a person takes their drugs, a diabetic can eat whatever they want. So there's been a lack of just not only silence, but complicitness. And as we become basically poisoned by food, the medical industry has profited from that. If you look at cancer rates in 1985, when the Surgeon General report came out, they've gone up an order of magnitude. So I joke about this, but it's true. We'd be much healthier if the cigarette companies went back to making cigarettes and not getting to our food. So yeah, it's been very deliberate.
I just saw this random study that popped up in my feed somewhere about Tufts.
Yeah.
And they said that Cocoa Puffs is healthier for you than ground beef.
Right. So this is the key point on that. It's funny, but at the top of that study, it says the point of the study is to influence childhood nutrition and marketing guidelines.
What does that even mean?
The stated purpose of the study is to achieve, they call it the most comprehensive dietary guidance ever conducted. That was what the report was heralded as, in order for governments to use this on marketing guidelines and nutrition guidelines for kids. So we hear about this study with the Tufts Nutrition School, which is one of the top nutrition schools in the country, and the NIH seal on it. Tufts Nutrition School, the person that did the study, Darius Mozaffarian, is the chair of the Biden Nutrition Council, very prominent guy. And that study comes out. He went to governments around the world. Believe it or not, they used that study in Africa to push marketing guidelines saying that cereal was safe. I mean, Africa is very concerned about nutrition and developing countries because they just can't afford the medical budget for exploding diabetes rates. And he actually went around the world to use that report saying, no, you don't need to come down on cereals. It's so funny seeing Lucky Charms is healthier than eggs, and dozens of name brand cereals, with added sugar as recommended, and grass-fed steak as discouraged. But the second that comes out, you're working for the food industry, you jam that down Congress' throat. You jam that to school boards. That's the point of these studies, because you can go into Congress, and I meet with them all the time now. And I was speaking recently to a member who's a military guy, very passionate about health and on one of the health committees. And I'm like, how does this all happen? How do we have such a dysfunctional system? He goes, well, this is not my issue. Like, I'm not a nutritionist. And they come in every day, the lobbyists and people, and they just have studies, Tufts Nutrition School, Harvard, and it's just like, it's basically this implicit threat that if he starts litigating any type of nutrition guideline, they'll just slap him with another study and call him anti-science. So what this preponderance of all these, studies and all this confusion do is just basically paralyze anyone, from disagreeing with it. And that's what they do at school boards. Like, the point of that study is shown when you go into a school and they're not serving farm fresh eggs, they're serving Lucky Charms, right?
Which is crazy.
That's the point. So it's funny But it's like, that's literally immediately at a school board. And it's like, it's basically giving cover for that school to be giving their kids sugar-laden cereal. Just last thing, Reese's Puffs, Reese's Pieces cereal was a recommended item.
And they had brand names on there.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't
It was
just
fun to know.
generic cereals. They had literal brand names, which is, I mean, I didn't see that one coming too. I mean, it's specific.
No, extreme. They had dozens of brand names,
and no one sees
including
that?
Reese's Puffs. Well, we saw it, and my co-founder Justin Mares and I wrote a Substack post and draw attention to it, and then Joe Rogan drew attention to it from something we posted, and then it kind of went viral. So you couldn't even make it up. But the study's author called me from Davos. He was on a panel actually promoting the study to people around the world about how cereal is healthy. And he started screaming at me. So he's in the hallways. He got my number, called me, and he started questioning my credentials. He said, "You don't know how this works." I said, "Sir, I have one question. Cheerios was rated as better than organic quinoa as a grain. Are you saying that the grains in Cheerios or Lucky Charms are as good as organic quinoa or some like whole natural grain?" He's like, "Yes, I do. I think that grain in Lucky Charms is as healthy as the most natural grain because they fortify it with vitamins and fortify it with other good things, which is a great advancement. And I would absolutely recommend somebody eating Reese's Puffs grains as much as any other whole grain." And I asked him, does the fact that you have been paid personal consulting payments, not research grants, but his conflicts of interest is a laundry list of personal bribes, I consider them, to him from food companies, from Ozempic distributor. Does this impact your guidance? Plus the fact that your school, Tufts Nutrition School, is majority funded by food companies. The food industry spends 11 times more on research than the NIH. Does that impact your judgment? He laughed at me and said, "You don't know how the world works. How dare you ever suggest that would impact my judgment? This is just the way it works, that we're funded the majority by food companies. There wouldn't be nutrition research otherwise. And of course not." And that's an outlandish implication. So he then threatened me and said, we know some of the same people at Stanford where we both went, and basically threatened to, if I kept rocking the boat, that he was going to talk to some of our mutual acquaintances at Stanford, which is, is always part of the game to threaten club membership if you happen to be advocating for children not poisoning themselves with added sugar. So, it was a educational experience.
I mean, and that's crazy because isn't this an issue that most people should be able to get around? Because you're talking about children. You're not talking about, vaccinating older generations of people, which it's not good, but it's not the same. We're talking about children.
Yeah, and I want to be clear because again, I used to be on the I still consider myself a conservative, and it's like you start getting into are we starting to lecture Americans what to eat? Are we starting to? No, I am saying one thing, and this is what I'm talking to anyone who will listen. The Trump campaign, RFK. Democrats I'm meeting with, this is my point. This is not about lecturing a parent what to feed their children. It's a step above that I think we all can agree on. Tufts Nutrition School and the NIH should not be recommending Reese's Puffs to 2-year-olds when we have a metabolic health crisis. We need to get the science right. The problem is that in America, we listen to scientific guidelines. For better or worse, right? When Dr. Fauci told us to get the shot, more than 90% of Americans got at least one shot. Right? When the Surgeon General came out with the smoking guidelines, smoking rates went down. My entire strategy and my core message is something we can all agree on, which is that the USDA should not be accepting money from food companies, which they do. The USDA advisors are able to accept money from food companies. 19 out of 20 USDA Nutrition Advisory Committee members are paid for by food companies. And today, as chronic disease is destroying our youngest generation, the USDA says that a 2-year-old can have 10% of their diet be added sugar, which is inexcusable. You have the NIH. The majority of grants that the NIH doles out are to people with conflicts. There's essentially zero foundational research that's happening at the NIH. The NIH is doling out 40 times more grants to study pharmaceutical treatments for cancer rather than study why people are getting cancer. Cancer is a preventable condition. There's no money being studied on what actually causes cancer. It's all to help pharmaceutical companies profit from exploding cancer rates. There is a cure for cancer. My mom died of pancreatic cancer. It was not a thing 50 years ago. Pancreatic cancer is a foodborne illness. Breast cancer is essentially a metabolic condition. Breast cancer rates are exploding. The research on tying that to prediabetes, diabetes, blood sugar dysregulation is astounding. Nobody talks about this. The links between many forms of cancer and food is as closely tied as smoking is to lung cancer. Sure, you can get them in some cases, but it's not random. Getting cancer and many forms of cancer is not random. It's totally predictable. If you are meeting the 5 qualifications of proper metabolic functioning, you have a dramatically lower chance of getting cancer. So there's not that type of research or communication coming from our medical authorities because they're completely co-opted by accepting the fact that we're just poisoning ourselves and getting sick and then profiting from it. Then getting to the FDA itself, which is 75% funded by pharma, the department that approves drugs. So it's fundamentally incentivized for the pharmaceutical industry to grow. If you can just get these incentives, which are very easy to attack, out of our foundational regulatory and scientific guideline authorities, then I'm fine where the policy falls. But the problem is members of Congress are literally getting reports saying Reese's Puffs are healthy for kids. You just attack the corruption, the policy will follow. That's my framework.